The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the Stockton saloon with such violence that Tessa Fairmont thought her ribs might crack against the wooden seat. And when she stumbled out into the California dust of 1878, 3 men on horseback were already waiting with guns on their hips and ledgers in their hands. She had known they would catch her eventually. The debt her father had accumulated before his death 6 months ago was not the kind that disappeared with a man into his grave. It followed his bloodline, clinging to whoever remained, and Tessa was all that remained. Her mother had died bringing her into this world 22 years ago, and now her father had left her with nothing but a name that carried shame, and a debt of $4,000 to men who collected with violence when necessary. "Miss Fairmont," the tallest of the 3 said, dismounting with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. His coat was dark despite the heat, his face lined with the kind of cruelty that came from years of breaking people who could not pay. "You have led us on quite the chase from San Francisco." Tessa's hands trembled as she gripped her single carpet bag. Everything she owned was inside it. 2 dresses, a photograph of her parents on their wedding day, her mother's silver hairbrush, and the deed to a property that turned out to be worthless swampland when she had tried to sell it. "I told your associates in San Francisco that I need more time. I am looking for work. I will pay what is owed." "Your father said the same thing for 3 years, the man replied. His companions had dismounted now too, forming a half-circle that trapped her against the stagecoach. "We are done waiting. You will come with us. There are houses in Sacramento that will pay good money for a woman who looks like you, and you can work off the debt on your back." The words hit her like a physical blow. She had heard stories of women disappearing into those places, their lives becoming a waking nightmare from which there was no escape. "No," she whispered, then louder. "No, you cannot do this." "We can do whatever we want," the man said, reaching for her arm. "Your father signed papers that made his debt transferable to his heirs. You belong to us now until the money is paid." Tessa tried to pull away, but his grip was iron. The other 2 men were laughing, and the stagecoach driver was already climbing back onto his seat, clearly wanting no part of whatever was about to happen. The few people on the street were turning away, unwilling to involve themselves in business that looked dangerous. "Let her go." The voice cut through the afternoon heat like a knife, quiet but carrying a weight that made all 3 debt collectors turn. Tessa followed their gaze and saw a man standing on the saloon steps. He was tall, built lean and strong in the way of men who worked with cattle and horses, his skin tanned dark from the California sun. He wore dusty work clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded eyes the color of storm clouds. A revolver hung at his hip, and though his hand was nowhere near it, there was something in his posture that suggested he knew exactly how to use it. "This is not your concern, Cowboy," the head collector said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "I am making it my concern," the man said, descending the steps with measured movements. "Let go of the lady. She owes money, significant money. Unless you are planning to pay $4,000, I suggest you walk away and let us conduct our business." Tessa watched in disbelief as the cowboy reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. $4,000, you said?" The collector's eyes widened slightly. "That is correct, plus the interest that has accumulated during her flight from San Francisco. Call it $4,500 to settle the account completely. Let her go first." There was a long moment where Tessa thought the collector might refuse, might try to hold onto both her and the promise of money. But something in the cowboy's eyes must have convinced him that would be a fatal mistake. He released her arm, and she stumbled backward, nearly falling before catching herself. The cowboy counted out bills with careful precision, the kind of money that Tessa had never seen in one place in her entire life. Here, 4,500. I want a receipt stating that Tessa Fairmont's debt is paid in full and that she owes your organization nothing more. The lead collector took the money with greedy hands, counting it twice before nodding to one of his companions. The man produced a ledger and a pen, scribbling out a hasty receipt that declared the debt satisfied. The cowboy took it, read it carefully, then folded it and put it in his pocket. "Now leave," he said quietly. "And if I hear that you have bothered Miss Fairmont again, I will come looking for you. That is a promise." The three men mounted their horses without another word. They were bullies, Tessa realized, dangerous to those who could not fight back, but cowards when confronted with someone who could. She watched them ride out of Stockton, dust rising behind their horses until they disappeared down the road toward Sacramento. When they were gone, she turned to look at her unexpected savior. He was watching her with an expression she could not quite read, concern mixed with something else. Curiosity, perhaps. "You are safe now," he said simply. Tessa felt tears burning in her eyes and fought them back. She would not cry in the street like a child, not after everything. "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." "Seemed like you needed help," he replied with a slight shrug. "I am Ryder Zimmerman. I run a cattle ranch about 5 miles outside of town." "Tessa Fairmont," she managed, though he clearly already knew her name. "I do not know how I will ever repay you. $4,500. That is a fortune." "Do not worry about it right now," Ryder said, and there was a gentleness in his voice that made her throat tighten. "You look like you have been traveling hard. Have you eaten today?" She could not remember the last time she had eaten a full meal. In San Francisco, she had been living on bread and whatever else she could afford while trying to find work that would let her start paying down the debt. But no respectable establishment would hire a woman whose father was known as a gambler and a drunk, and the less respectable establishments had made offers she would rather die than accept. "No," she admitted. "Come on then," Ryder said, gesturing toward the saloon. "Let me buy you dinner. You can tell me your story if you want, or you can eat in silence. Either way is fine." Tessa followed him into the saloon because she did not know what else to do. Her mind was reeling from how quickly her circumstances had changed. 10 minutes ago, she had been facing a future too horrible to contemplate. And now she was walking into a saloon with a stranger who had just spent a fortune to save her from it. The saloon was quieter than she expected, more restaurant than drinking establishment at this hour. Ryder led her to a corner table and ordered 2 plates of steak and potatoes, along with coffee that was strong enough to strip paint. Tessa wrapped her hands around the cup and let the warmth seep into her fingers. "Why were you running from debt collectors?" Ryder asked after the waitress had left. His tone was conversational, not accusatory. "My father," Tessa said quietly, staring down at the dark surface of her coffee. "He had a fondness for card games and whiskey. He was not good at either. The debt built up over years. I did not know how bad it was until he died and the collectors came to our door in San Francisco. I have been trying to find a way to pay it, but no one will hire me. They all knew my father's reputation." "What did you do in San Francisco?" "Before all this, I worked as a seamstress," Tessa said. "I am good with a needle. I can sew anything from a simple shirt to a wedding dress. But when the collectors started coming around, I lost my position. My employer did not want that kind of trouble associated with his shop." Ryder nodded slowly, processing this information. "Can you cook?" The question caught her off guard. "Yes. My father was not capable of it, so I learned young." "Why?" "I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, but she has been wanting to cut back her hours. She is getting older and the work is hard. If you can sew and cook, I could use someone at the ranch." It would not pay much to start, room and board plus maybe $30 a month, but it would be honest work and you would be safe. Tessa stared at him, trying to understand why this stranger was continuing to help her. Men did not do things out of pure kindness, not in her experience. There was always a price. "What do you want from me?" Ryder met her eyes steadily. "Nothing beyond a fair day's work. I am not in the habit of taking advantage of women in difficult situations if that is what you are worried about. You would have your own room with a lock on the door. Mrs. Chen lives on the property too, so you would not be alone with just me. The work is legitimate." "Why are you doing this?" Tessa asked, her voice breaking slightly. "You have already given me so much." "My mother was in a situation similar to yours once," Ryder said quietly. "Before she met my father, she had debts from her first husband's mistakes and no way to pay them. Someone helped her when they did not have to, gave her a chance to start over. She told me that story more times than I can count, made me promise that if I ever had the means, I would help someone else the same way. So I am keeping that promise." The food arrived, and Tessa realized she was ravenous. The steak was tough but well seasoned, the potatoes crispy and salted perfectly. She ate with more desperation than grace, and Ryder politely pretended not to notice. When she finally set down her fork, her stomach full for the first time in days, she felt steadier. "I will take the position," she said firmly, "and I will work hard. I promise you that." "I believe you," Ryder said with a slight smile that transformed his serious face into something warmer. "We can head out to the ranch whenever you are ready. I need to pick up some supplies, but that will not take long." They left the saloon an hour later, Tessa's carpetbag in hand and a bag of flour over Ryder's shoulder. His horse was tied outside, a big bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm temperament. Ryder loaded the supplies and then helped Tessa up into the saddle before swinging up behind her. She stiffened at the closeness, very aware of his chest against her back and his arms on either side of her as he took the reins. "Relax," he said quietly near her ear. "It is about 5 miles. The ride will be easier if you are not sitting like a wooden plank." Tessa forced herself to breathe and gradually let her muscles unclench. As the horse moved into an easy walk and then a gentle lope, she found a rhythm with the movement. The California landscape stretched out around them, golden grasslands broken by oak trees and distant hills that were already turning brown in the summer heat. The sky was enormous, a blue dome that seemed to go on forever. "It is beautiful here," she said without thinking. "It is," Ryder agreed. "I have been working this land for 5 years now, built the ranch up from nothing. It is not the biggest operation, but it is mine and it is honest work." "Do you run it alone?" "I have 2 ranch hands, brothers named Miguel and Carlos. They live in the bunkhouse. Good men, hard workers. You will meet them tonight. Mrs. Chen has been with me for 3 years. She is from China originally, came over with her husband to work on the railroads. He died in an accident and she needed a position. She is a tough old woman, does not tolerate nonsense, but she has a good heart." The ranch appeared on the horizon gradually, starting as a cluster of shapes that resolved into buildings as they drew closer. The main house was modest but well built, 2 stories of clean white paint with a wide porch and shutters on the windows. There was a barn that looked new, a corral with several horses grazing inside it, and a smaller building that must be the bunkhouse. Beyond that, Tessa could see cattle dotting the hillsides, brown and white shapes moving slowly through the grass. Ryder brought the horse to a stop in front of the main house and dismounted, then helped Tessa down. Her legs were unsteady after the ride, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow until she found her balance. "Mrs. Chen," he called toward the house, "we have a guest." The front door opened and a small Chinese woman emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. She had iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that took in everything about Tessa in a single sweeping glance. "Who is this?" she asked in accented but clear English. "This is Tessa Fairmont. She is going to be helping around the house. Tessa, this is Mrs. Chen." The older woman's eyes narrowed slightly. "Helping how?" "Sewing, cooking, whatever needs doing. She will have the spare room upstairs." Mrs. Chen looked at Tessa again, and Tessa had the uncomfortable feeling of being weighed and measured. "You know how to work, not just play at it." "I know how to work," Tessa said, meeting the woman's eyes. "I have been earning my own way since I was 14 years old." Something in Mrs. Chen's expression softened fractionally. "Good. Too many useless girls these days. Come inside. I will show you the room." Ryder handed Tessa her carpet bag and gave her an encouraging nod before heading toward the barn with his horse. Mrs. Chen led Tessa into the house, which was clean and simply furnished. The main room had a stone fireplace, a worn but comfortable-looking sofa, and a dining table that could seat 6. The kitchen was through a doorway to the left, and Tessa could see a cast-iron stove and shelves lined with preserves and dry goods. "Stairs are here," Mrs. Chen said, leading her to a narrow staircase. "Mr. Zimmerman has the room at the end of the hall. You will be in the room on the right. Mine is on the left. Bathroom is downstairs off the kitchen. We heat water for baths on Saturday nights." The room was small but clean, with a single bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a wardrobe for clothes. The window looked out over the front of the property, and Tessa could see the corral and the hills beyond. It was more than she had dared hope for. "This is wonderful," she said quietly. "Thank you," Mrs. Chen grunted. "Mr. Zimmerman told me some of your story about the debt collectors. He is a good man, but he trusts too easy sometimes. You cause trouble here, you will answer to me. Understood?" "I will not cause trouble," Tessa promised. "I am grateful for this chance. I will not waste it." "We will see," Mrs. Chen said, but her tone was less sharp. "Unpack your things. Dinner is at 6. You can start helping tomorrow morning." When the older woman left, Tessa sank down onto the bed and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. This morning she had woken in a flea-bitten boarding house in Sacramento, knowing the collectors were close and that she was running out of places to run. Now she was in a clean room in a ranch house, with the promise of honest work and safety. And all because a stranger had decided to help her. She pulled the receipt from where Ryder had given it to her as they rode, just to prove it was real. The words were there in black ink: "Debt paid in full. Tessa Fairmont owes nothing." She folded it carefully and put it in her carpet bag, then unpacked her few belongings. The 2 dresses were wrinkled from travel, and she hung them in the wardrobe to air out. Her mother's hairbrush went on the washstand, and the photograph of her parents went on the small shelf above the bed. She washed her face and hands in the basin, scrubbing away the dust of travel, then changed into her better dress. It was dark blue cotton, simple but well made, and she had sewn it herself. When she looked in the small mirror above the washstand, she barely recognized herself. She had lost weight during the months of running and fear, and there were shadows under her green eyes that had not been there before. But she was safe now. Ryder had said so, and she chose to believe him. Dinner was venison stew with vegetables, served at the big dining table. Ryder had cleaned up and changed into fresh clothes, his dark hair still damp from washing. The 2 ranch hands joined them, Miguel and Carlos, who were indeed brothers and who nodded politely to Tessa, but seemed more interested in the food than conversation. Mrs. Chen served everyone with efficient movements, then sat down herself. "Miss Fairmont will be helping around the house starting tomorrow," Ryder told the table. I expect everyone to treat her with respect." Miguel, who looked to be in his 30s, nodded. "Of course, Mr. Zimmerman." "Welcome, Miss Fairmont." "Thank you," Tessa said quietly. The meal was good, hearty and filling, and the conversation was minimal but comfortable. Tessa learned that they were preparing for a cattle drive to Sacramento in 2 weeks, that one of the horses had thrown a shoe and needed the blacksmith, and that there was a social in town the following Saturday night that most of the ranch was planning to attend. After dinner, Tessa helped Mrs. Chen clean up despite the older woman's protests that she should rest on her first night. But Tessa needed to be useful, needed to prove that she was worth the faith Ryder had placed in her. They washed dishes in companionable silence, and when the kitchen was clean, Mrs. Chen gave her a curt nod that felt like approval. Tessa went to bed early, exhausted from the day's events and the emotional turmoil of the past months. She lay in the darkness listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the wind rustling through the oak trees, the creak of the house settling. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt safe enough to truly sleep. The next morning, she woke to the sound of roosters and was dressed and downstairs before the sun had fully risen. Mrs. Chen was already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for the ranch hands who started work at dawn. She handed Tessa a knife and a basket of potatoes without comment, and Tessa began peeling them with practiced efficiency. "You are not lying about knowing how to work," Mrs. Chen observed after watching her for a few minutes. "I told you I was not," Tessa replied. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Tessa rose early and helped with breakfast, then spent her mornings working on whatever tasks Mrs. Chen set for her. She learned where everything was kept, how the household ran, what needed to be done and when. In the afternoons, she worked on mending and sewing, and she discovered that the ranch produced a steady supply of torn shirts, ripped pants, and worn-out work clothes that needed repair. She saw Ryder in passing throughout the days, usually at meals or when he came to the house for something. He was always polite, always kind, but he did not press her to talk or spend time with her beyond what was natural. Tessa was grateful for that. She needed time to find her footing, to believe that this new life was real and not something that would be snatched away. 2 weeks after her arrival, on a Saturday afternoon, Ryder appeared in the kitchen where she was working on hemming a new set of curtains for the sitting room. "There is a social in town tonight," he said. "Dancing and food. Mrs. Chen is going with Miguel and Carlos. I thought you might like to come too, get to know some of the people in Stockton." Tessa hesitated. The idea of going into town, of being around people who might ask questions about who she was and where she had come from, made her nervous. But she also knew she could not hide on the ranch forever. "I do not know how to dance very well," she admitted. "Neither do half the people who will be there," Ryder said with a smile. "Come on, it will be good for you to get out of the house." So that evening, Tessa found herself riding into Stockton in the back of the ranch wagon, wedged between Mrs. Chen and a basket of food the older woman was contributing to the social. She wore her best dress, the dark blue cotton, and had braided her auburn hair into a crown around her head. Mrs. Chen had lent her a shawl against the evening chill that would come when the sun set. The social was held in the town hall, a large wooden building that had been decorated with bunting and lanterns. Music spilled out into the street, fiddle and guitar and the stomp of dancing feet. Inside, it seemed like half of Stockton had turned out. Women in their Sunday best clustered in groups, gossiping and watching the dancers. Men gathered near the refreshment table, drinking punch and comparing notes on their crops and livestock. Ryder stayed close to Tessa as they entered, which she appreciated. She felt exposed and uncertain, very aware that she was a stranger in this community. But people seemed to accept her presence without question, nodding to Ryder and offering Tessa friendly smiles. "Ryder Zimmerman," a booming voice called out, and a large man with a salt and pepper beard pushed through the crowd. "Heard you pulled quite the hero move a couple weeks back. Paid off some debt collectors who were hassling a young lady." Tessa felt her face flush as attention turned toward them. She had hoped that incident had gone unnoticed, but of course it had not. It was too dramatic, too unusual. "Just help someone who needed it, Paul," Ryder said evenly. "Well, it is a good thing you did," the man replied. He looked at Tessa with kind eyes. "I am Paul Henderson. I run the general store. If those men had taken you where they were planning, it would have been a tragedy. We do not tolerate that kind of business in Stockton." "Thank you," Tessa said quietly. "I am grateful that Mr. Zimmerman intervened. Are you working out at his ranch now?" A woman asked, joining the conversation. She was middle-aged with a pleasant face and graying blonde hair. "Yes, madam, I help Mrs. Chen with the household." "That is good," the woman said warmly. "I am Margaret Henderson, Paul's wife. Welcome to Stockton. I hope you will be happy here." After that, more people came over to introduce themselves, and Tessa began to relax slightly. These were good people, she realized, farmers and merchants and craftsmen who worked hard and looked out for each other. No one asked prying questions about her past, and no one treated her with anything less than kindness. When the music started up again, Ryder surprised her by offering his hand. "Would you like to dance?" Tessa's heart did a strange little jump in her chest. "I told you I am not very good at it." "That is all right. I will lead." She let him draw her onto the dance floor, very aware of his hand at her waist and his other hand holding hers. The music was a simple waltz, and after a few stumbling steps, she found the rhythm. Ryder was a better dancer than she expected, guiding her smoothly through the movements. "You are doing fine," he said quietly, and when she looked up, she found him watching her with those storm-gray eyes. Something in his expression made her breath catch. "Thank you," she managed. "For this." "For everything. You do not need to keep thanking me, Tessa." "Yes, I do. You saved my life. You gave me a chance when I had none. That is not something I will forget." They danced in silence for a moment, and Tessa found herself noticing things about Ryder she had not let herself see before. The way he moved with easy confidence, the strength in his hands, the faint scar along his jaw that she wondered about. He was handsome, she realized with a start. Not in a flashy way, but in the quiet, solid way of a man who knew exactly who he was. "Why have you never married?" she asked before she could stop herself, then immediately regretted the forward question. "I am sorry. That was inappropriate," but Ryder did not seem offended. "Never found the right woman, I suppose. I have been focused on building the ranch, making something that would last. There are not a lot of women out here who want the kind of life ranching offers. It is hard work and long hours, and the nearest town is 5 miles away." "Some women might see that as an adventure rather than a hardship," Tessa said. "Maybe," Ryder replied with a slight smile. "What about you? Were you ever engaged?" "No. There was a man in San Francisco who showed interest, but that was before my father's debts became known. He disappeared quickly after that." She tried to keep the bitterness out of her voice but was not entirely successful. "Then he was a fool," Ryder said simply. The dance ended, and they returned to the edge of the floor. Tessa's heart was beating faster than the dancing warranted, and she was very aware of how close Ryder stood beside her. She told herself it was just gratitude she felt, appreciation for his kindness. But there was something else stirring beneath that, something warmer and more dangerous. The evening passed in a pleasant blur. She danced with Miguel and Carlos, who were both surprisingly graceful despite their rough exterior. She talked with Margaret Henderson and other women from town who asked about her sewing skills and whether she might be willing to take on some commission work. She ate food from the long tables laden with dishes everyone had contributed, and she laughed for the first time in months. When they finally headed back to the ranch in the dark, the wagon rattling over the dirt road under a sky full of stars, Tessa felt something in her chest loosen. She could make a life here, she thought. She could be happy. Over the following weeks, summer deepened into the dry heat of August. The cattle drive to Sacramento came and went successfully, and Ryder returned with money that he used to buy supplies and a new horse. Tessa's days were full of work, but it was satisfying work, the kind that left her tired but content. She took on sewing commissions from women in town, staying up late by lamplight to finish shirts and dresses and children's clothing. The extra money went into a tin box under her bed, savings for a future she was only beginning to imagine. She also found herself spending more time with Ryder, often by accident, but sometimes on purpose. He would find her in the kitchen after dinner and ask if she wanted to walk out to see the horses. Or he would appear in the doorway while she was sewing and ask her opinion on something related to the ranch. Their conversations were easy, ranging from serious topics to silly ones, and Tessa discovered that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. Mrs. Chen noticed, of course. The older woman missed nothing. One evening, after Ryder had left the kitchen and Tessa had returned to her sewing with a slight smile on her face, Mrs. Chen said bluntly, "You are falling for him." Tessa's hand stilled on the fabric. "What, Mr. Zimmerman?" "You have feelings for him, I can see it." "I am grateful to him," Tessa said carefully. "He saved me from a terrible fate. Of course I care about him." "That is not what I mean, and you know it," Mrs. Chen said. She sat down across from Tessa, her expression serious. "He has feelings for you, too. I have seen how he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching." Tessa's heart was suddenly racing. "You are mistaken. I am old, not blind. The question is what you are going to do about it." "Nothing," Tessa said firmly. "He is my employer. He gave me a position and a safe place to live. I will not repay that by complicating things with romantic notions." Mrs. Chen snorted. "Love is not a complication. It is life. Mr. Zimmerman is a good man. He deserves happiness. So do you." "I have been here less than 3 months," Tessa protested. "That is hardly enough time to know if what I feel is real or just gratitude." "Then take more time," Mrs. Chen said with a shrug. "But do not lie to yourself about what is happening between you two. That helps no one." After that conversation, Tessa found it impossible to ignore her growing feelings for Ryder. She noticed everything about him, the way he spoke gently to the horses, the care he took with his ranch hands, the moments of quiet thoughtfulness when he stared out at the land he had built. She noticed the way he looked at her too, the soft expression that came over his face when their eyes met, the way he seemed to seek out her company. But she did not act on those feelings. She was still too aware of the debt she owed him, even though he had told her repeatedly to forget about it. She had nothing to offer a man like Ryder. No dowry, no family connections, nothing but her work and her skills with a needle. It did not seem like enough. September brought cooler nights and the first hints of fall. The ranch was busy with preparations for winter, repairing fences and buildings, stocking up on supplies, bringing the cattle down from the high pastures. Tessa threw herself into the work, helping Mrs. Chen can vegetables and fruits for the winter months, sewing heavy curtains to keep out the cold, making quilts from fabric scraps. One afternoon, she was in the barn mending a saddle blanket when Ryder came in leading a horse with a cut on its foreleg. "Can you hold him steady while I clean this?" he asked. Tessa set aside her sewing and took the horse's bridle, speaking softly to the animal while Ryder examined the wound. It was not deep, but it needed to be cleaned and bandaged to prevent infection. She watched as he worked with gentle, competent hands and found herself wondering what those hands would feel like on her skin. "Tessa," Ryder's voice broke into her thoughts. "Are you all right? You looked far away." "I am fine," she said quickly, feeling her face heat. "Just thinking." About what? She should have made something up, should have deflected the question. But instead, she found herself saying, "About how much my life has changed since I arrived in Stockton, how different everything is from what I expected." Ryder finished bandaging the horse's leg and straightened, looking at her seriously. "Are you happy here?" "Yes," Tessa said honestly. "Happier than I have been in a long time. You gave me that, you and Mrs. Chen and this place." "It is not just the place," Ryder said quietly. "You brought something here too, something that was missing before." "What do you mean?" He took a step closer, and suddenly the barn felt very small. "You made this house feel like a home, made me realize how lonely I had been without knowing it." Tessa's breath caught. "Ryder, I know I should not be saying this," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "You work for me, and that makes this complicated. But I cannot keep pretending that I do not feel what I feel. I think about you all the time, Tessa. I look for excuses to be near you. And if I am reading this wrong, if you do not feel the same way, tell me now and I will never mention it again." Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "You are not reading it wrong," she whispered. "I feel it too. I have been trying not to because I owe you so much already." "You do not owe me anything," Ryder said firmly. He reached out and took her hand, his touch sending warmth through her entire body. "What I did for you, I did because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected anything in return. But if there is a chance that you might care for me, not out of gratitude but because of who I am, then I want to know." "I do care for you," Tessa said, the words tumbling out now that she had started. "More than I should, more than is probably wise. You are kind and good and honest, and when I am with you, I feel safe in a way I never have before." Ryder's eyes lit up with an emotion so intense it made her dizzy. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture that was somehow more intimate than anything she had experienced. "Can I court you properly?" he asked. "The way you deserve?" "Yes," Tessa breathed. "Yes, you can." The courtship that followed was sweet and old-fashioned. Ryder took her on picnics out to the far corners of the ranch, where they sat on blankets and talked for hours about everything and nothing. He brought her wildflowers that grew on the hillsides, bunches of purple lupine and golden poppies that she arranged in a jar on the kitchen table. They went to church on Sundays and socials on Saturday nights, and Ryder made it clear to everyone in Stockton that Tessa Fairmont was his intended. Mrs. Chen watched it all with satisfaction, occasionally muttering, "I told you so," when they thought she was not listening. Miguel and Carlos treated Tessa with even more respect once they understood her new status, and the ranch hands who came and went for seasonal work quickly learned to tip their hats and mind their manners around the boss's lady. But beneath the sweetness of the courtship, there was also a building tension, a physical awareness that made Tessa's skin feel too tight whenever Ryder was near. They had not kissed yet beyond chaste brushes of lips at the end of evenings, and she found herself lying awake at night thinking about what it would be like when they finally did. The opportunity came in October, during the harvest festival that Stockton held every year. The entire town turned out for games and contests, food and dancing. Tessa wore a new dress she had sewn for the occasion, a deep green that brought out the color of her eyes, and Ryder had clearly put extra effort into his appearance too, his dark hair neatly combed and his shirt pressed. They danced multiple times throughout the evening, and Tessa was aware of the envious looks some of the other women gave her. Ryder Zimmerman was considered one of the best catches in the county, and she was the one he had chosen. It still felt unreal sometimes. As the evening wore on, they slipped away from the crowd and walked toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open fields. The moon was nearly full, bright enough to cast shadows, and the air was cool and smelled of harvested grain. "I have been wanting to do something," Ryder said, stopping and turning to face her, "but I wanted to wait until the time felt right." "What is that?" Tessa asked, though she thought she knew. "This," he said simply, and then he was kissing her properly for the first time, his lips warm and firm against hers. Tessa's arms came up around his neck, and she kissed him back with all the pent-up longing of the past weeks. It was everything she had imagined and more, heat and tenderness, and a sense of rightness that made her feel like she was finally home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it has not been very long, but I know what I feel. I want you as my wife, Tessa. I want to build a life with you." Tears sprang to Tessa's eyes, but they were happy tears this time. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Stockton, with what felt like the entire town in attendance. Tessa wore a dress she had sewn herself, white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried a bouquet of late-blooming roses from Mrs. Chen's garden. Ryder wore his best suit and looked so handsome, it made her heart ache. Mrs. Chen cried during the ceremony, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief and pretending she was not. Miguel and Carlos stood as witnesses, along with Margaret Henderson. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife and Ryder kissed her in front of everyone, Tessa felt like her heart might burst with happiness. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food contributed by what seemed like every family in the county. There was dancing and music and toasts that went on until the stars came out. When it was finally over and the last guests had departed, Ryder carried Tessa over the threshold of the house that was now truly hers. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, Ryder patient with her inexperience and Tessa eager to learn. She had been nervous, but when he held her and touched her with such care, the nervousness melted away into something much warmer. They loved each other slowly, learning the shapes and sounds of each other, and when it was over, Tessa lay in Ryder's arms feeling more complete than she ever had. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Ryder replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Tessa Zimmerman." Her new name. She was Tessa Zimmerman now, and the girl who had arrived in Stockton running from debt collectors felt like a different person entirely. The first months of marriage were blissful. Tessa moved her belongings into Ryder's room, which became their room, and she threw herself into making the house truly feel like a home. She sewed new curtains for every window, made quilts for all the beds, planted a kitchen garden that would provide vegetables come spring. She continued taking sewing commissions from women in town, and her reputation as a skilled seamstress grew. Mrs. Chen officially reduced her hours, coming in only to help with the big tasks like laundry and preserving. She spent more time in her own small house on the property, a cottage that Ryder had built for her years ago. But she still joined them for Sunday dinners and continued to dispense advice whether it was wanted or not. Winter came, bringing cold rains and occasional frost. The ranch work slowed, and Tessa found herself spending long evenings by the fire with Ryder, reading or sewing while he worked on the account books or repaired tack. They talked about the future, about expanding the cattle operation and maybe adding sheep, about building a bigger barn and hiring more help. In February, Tessa missed her monthly courses. She tried not to hope too much, knowing that sometimes these things were irregular. But when she missed them again in March, she could no longer deny the truth. She was pregnant. She told Ryder on a clear spring evening when they were walking out to check on the new calves. "I have news," she said, taking his hand. "I am going to have a baby." Ryder stopped walking and stared at her, his expression stunned. Then a smile spread across his face so wide it looked like it might split. "A baby, you are sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor, but all the signs are there." He pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. "A baby," he repeated wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." They made the trip into Stockton the next week to see the doctor, who confirmed what Tessa already knew. She was about 3 months along, which meant the baby would arrive sometime in October. The news spread through the ranch and then through town, and suddenly, everyone had advice about pregnancy and childbirth and raising children. Mrs. Chen took charge with her usual efficiency, making sure Tessa did not overwork herself and preparing a layette of tiny clothes and blankets. Margaret Henderson organized the women of Stockton to put together gifts, appearing at the ranch one afternoon with a wagon full of supplies and well wishes. As spring turned to summer, and Tessa's belly grew round with their child, she found herself marveling at how much her life had changed in less than a year. 12 months ago she had been running from debt collectors, desperate and afraid. Now she was married to a man she loved deeply, carrying his child, living in a home that felt safe and solid. The baby arrived in mid-October, on a cool afternoon when the leaves on the oak trees were turning gold. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Tessa thought she might not survive it. But Mrs. Chen and the midwife from town stayed with her, and Ryder held her hand through the worst of it. And finally, after 14 hours, their son was born. He was perfect, small and red and screaming his displeasure at being thrust into the world. Ryder held him with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face, and said, "He is beautiful. You are amazing. I love you so much." They named him James, after Ryder's father, and he became the center of their universe. Tessa had never known she could love something so fiercely, this tiny person who depended on her for everything. She nursed him and changed him and spent hours just watching him sleep, marveling at his miniature perfection. Ryder was a devoted father, getting up in the night to bring James to Tessa for feeding, walking the floor with him when he was fussy, singing off key lullabies that made Tessa smile. The ranch hands tiptoed around when the baby was sleeping, and Mrs. Chen knitted endless tiny sweaters and hats. The first year of James's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and exhausting days and moments of pure joy. He grew quickly, developing a personality that was all his own, curious and stubborn and already showing signs of his father's quiet determination. When James was 14 months old, Tessa discovered she was pregnant again. This time it was easier somehow, maybe because she knew what to expect. Their daughter arrived the following summer, smaller than James had been but with a powerful set of lungs. They named her Grace, and she looked like Tessa with auburn hair and green eyes. The years that followed were full and good. The ranch prospered, expanding to include a larger herd and more land. Ryder hired additional help, including a young man named Daniel who proved to have a gift with horses. Mrs. Chen eventually retired completely, spending her days in her cottage with the cat that James had found as a stray and insisted on keeping. James and Grace grew up surrounded by space and sky, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with ranch work as soon as they were old enough. Tessa continued her sewing work, though she had to fit it in around raising children and managing the household. She and Ryder remained deeply in love, stealing moments alone when they could, still finding joy in each other after years of marriage. When James was 8 and Grace was 6, Tessa gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named William and Thomas. The house was suddenly very full and very loud, but also full of laughter. Ryder had to hire a girl from town to help Tessa with the children, and they added rooms onto the house to accommodate their growing family. The children brought challenges as well as joy. There were illnesses and accidents, the normal childhood dramas of scraped knees and hurt feelings. There were bad years when drought threatened the cattle and good years when they had more than they needed. But through it all, Tessa and Ryder faced things together, their bond growing stronger with each passing season. One evening when Tessa was 40 years old and Ryder was 43, they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. James was 17 now, tall and serious, already talking about taking over more responsibility on the ranch. Grace was 15, beautiful and spirited, with plans to become a teacher. The twins were 9 identical whirlwinds of energy who kept everyone on their toes. "You ever think about that day in Stockton?" Ryder asked quietly. "When you first arrived?" "All the time," Tessa admitted. "I think about what my life would have been if you had not intervened, where I would be now, if I would even still be alive." "I think about it too," Ryder said. "About how close I came to not being in town that day. I almost stayed at the ranch to work on the fences. If I had, we never would have met. Fate," Tessa said softly, "or luck, or God's plan. Whatever it was, I am grateful for it every single day." He took her hand, his thumb rubbing over the simple gold band he had placed there 18 years ago. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Tessa. You and our children. You made my life mean something more than just work and land." "You saved me," Tessa said, emotion thick in her throat. "In every way a person can be saved. You gave me a home and a family and a future I never thought I would have. I love you so much, Ryder." "I love you too," he replied, pulling her close. They sat together as the sun set over the California hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and watched their children play. It was an ordinary moment, unremarkable in many ways, but it was everything Tessa had ever wanted. The years continued to pass. James eventually married a girl from Stockton named Sarah, and they moved into a house Ryder helped them build on the far edge of the ranch property. Grace did become a teacher, taking a position in town and eventually marrying the doctor's son. The twins grew into young men who were as different as night and day despite looking identical, William wanting to stay on the ranch and Thomas dreaming of adventure in San Francisco. Tessa's hair gained threads of silver, and Ryder's dark hair went fully gray. They became grandparents, first to James and Sarah's children, then to Grace's. The ranch house that had once echoed with the sounds of their own children filled again with the laughter of grandchildren visiting on weekends and holidays. Mrs. Chen passed away peacefully in her sleep when she was 84, and they buried her in the cemetery in Stockton with a headstone that read, "Beloved Friend." Tessa wept at the funeral, remembering the stern old woman who had become family, who had told her bluntly that she was falling in love, and that love was not a complication but life itself. Miguel and Carlos retired eventually, their own children taking their places on the ranch. The land prospered under multiple generations of care, and the Zimmerman name became synonymous with honest dealing and quality cattle. When Tessa was 58 and Ryder was 61, they took a trip to San Francisco, something they had talked about for years but never done. They stayed in a nice hotel and walked the streets where Tessa had once lived in poverty and fear. But it felt like a different world now, like something from someone else's life. "I barely remember being that frightened girl," Tessa said as they stood looking at the building where her father's debts had been held. It had been torn down and replaced with something new. She feels like a stranger. She was brave, Ryder said. She ran when she needed to run. She survived when things were impossible. That girl became the woman I love. I am grateful to her for that. They returned to Stockton after a week, both relieved to be home. The city was exciting, but it was not where they belonged. They belonged to the land, and the sky and the life they had built together. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children organized a party that brought together what felt like everyone they had ever known. The ranch overflowed with people, 3 generations of family and friends who had become family. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. Speeches were given, toasting Tessa and Ryder's long marriage and the legacy they had built. When it was time to cut the anniversary cake, Ryder pulled Tessa close and kissed her in front of everyone, just like he had at their wedding. The crowd cheered, and Tessa laughed, feeling young despite the gray in her hair and the lines on her face. "Still the best decision I ever made," Ryder murmured against her lips. "Paying my debt or marrying me," Tessa teased. "Both, everything, all of it." They danced together as the sun set, the same way they had danced at that first social in Stockton decades ago. Tessa's feet knew the steps by heart now, and she followed Ryder's lead without thinking, their bodies moving together with the ease of long practice. As the evening wound down and the guests began to depart, Tessa found herself standing on the porch looking out at the ranch. The main house had been expanded multiple times over the years. The barn had been rebuilt after a fire in their 10th year. New fences crisscrossed the property, dividing pastures and marking boundaries. But the bones of it were still the same place where she had arrived all those years ago, desperate and afraid. James came to stand beside her, his own children playing nearby. "It is a good life you and Pa built here," he said quietly. "It is," Tessa agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "You know the story about how you met has become kind of famous, right? People talk about it like a legend. The cowboy who paid off the debt collectors and told the lady she was safe." Tessa smiled. "It was not quite that dramatic, but your father did save me, that is true. He said you saved him too, that he was lonely before you came, even though he did not know it." "I suppose we saved each other then," Tessa said. She thought about that afternoon in Stockton, the fear and desperation she had felt, the 3 men who had been ready to sell her into a nightmare. And then, Ryder had stepped off the saloon porch and changed everything with his quiet courage and unexpected kindness. More years passed, bringing the inevitable losses that come with a long life. Ryder's health began to fail when he was in his early 70s, his heart not as strong as it had once been. He could no longer do the heavy ranch work, and James took over more of the daily operations. But Ryder was content to sit on the porch and watch his grandchildren and great-grandchildren play, Tessa always nearby. They celebrated their 40th anniversary with just family, a quiet dinner at home. Ryder was frailer now, his movements slower, but his eyes still lit up when he looked at Tessa. 40 years, he said wonderingly. It went by so fast. Too fast, Tessa agreed. She was 70 now, her hands arthritic and her auburn hair gone completely white. But she still felt young inside, especially when Ryder smiled at her. "You have any regrets?" Ryder asked her later that night as they lay in bed together. "Not a single one," Tessa said honestly. "Every day with you has been a gift, even the hard ones." "Good," Ryder said, pulling her close. "That is all I ever wanted, to make you happy." "You did," Tessa whispered. "You made me happier than I ever thought possible." Ryder passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later with Tessa holding his hand. She woke in the morning to find him gone, his face peaceful in death. The grief was overwhelming, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. After 42 years of marriage, she had to learn how to be alone again. The funeral was enormous, people coming from all over California to pay their respects to a man who had been known for his integrity and kindness. Tessa accepted their condolences with quiet grace, her children and grandchildren surrounding her with love and support. She continued to live at the ranch for 3 more years, though James and his family moved into the main house to care for her. She spent her days sewing and reading and playing with her great-grandchildren, and visiting Ryder's grave every week with fresh flowers. When Tessa was 75 years old, she went to sleep one night and did not wake up. She died peacefully, and her family liked to think that she had gone to join Ryder, wherever he was waiting. They buried her next to him in the Stockton cemetery, under a shared headstone that read Ryder and Tessa Zimmerman, beloved husband and wife, together always. At the funeral, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren told stories about the love that had built a legacy, about the cowboy who had paid off debt collectors, and told a frightened woman she was safe, about the life they had made together from that single act of kindness. The ranch continued under James's stewardship and eventually his children's. The Zimmerman name remained respected in Stockton and the surrounding counties. And the story of Ryder and Tessa, the cowboy and the woman fleeing debt collectors, became a tale that parents told their children, a reminder that love could bloom even in the darkest circumstances, that kindness could change lives, that sometimes the best things began with the simplest acts of human decency. In the ranch house, now home to the 4th generation of Zimmermans, there was a framed photograph of Ryder and Tessa taken on their 25th anniversary. They were older in the picture, gray-haired and lined with time, but the love in their eyes as they looked at each other was unmistakable. Below it hung the receipt that Ryder had demanded all those decades ago in Stockton, the paper yellowed and fragile but the words still readable. Debt paid in full. Tessa Fairmont owes nothing. It was a reminder of where they had started, and a testament to everything they had built from that beginning. A love story that had lasted a lifetime, born from fear and desperation, and one man's decision to help a stranger when he did not have to. It was the kind of story that made people believe in happy endings, in the possibility that even when things seemed hopeless, salvation might be just around the corner wearing a cowboy hat and offering quiet words of comfort. You are safe now. 3 words that had changed everything, that had given Tessa not just physical safety, but a future filled with love and family and purpose. 3 words that became the foundation of a life well lived, of children raised and grandchildren cherished, of a partnership that weathered every storm. The legacy of Ryder and Tessa Zimmerman lived on in the ranch that still operated under their name, in the descendants who carried their blood and their values, in the stories told around dinner tables about true love and second chances. It lived on in the memory of a community that had witnessed their love story from its dramatic beginning to its peaceful end. And somewhere in the cemetery in Stockton, California, under the shade of an ancient oak tree, 2 headstones stood side by side, marking the final resting place of a cowboy and the woman he had saved, who had saved him right back. Together always, just as they had promised each other 42 years earlier, and just as they would remain for all eternity.